Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Pedophile Huntress. Today, I have with me Louise Sedwick. I am so excited to share her story. She's doing really good work out there. She's written a book called Lifted from Shame. She also hosts a podcast called Lifted to Hope. She and I share similar stories in that our abusers were our fathers. There are so many conflicts. I was listening to her story. She's been on a few podcasts. And as I listened to her story, one of the things I really wanted to talk about with her today are the many conflicts that happen when you come from a home of incest. In her case, they were pillars of their community. They went to church all the time. I know that many of the listeners are going to find themselves here because I hear from a lot of you. And there's conflict when the people that teach us about God also horrifically abuse us. She also talked about some other conflicts that I want to bring up, but I want to welcome you here. Thank you so much for being with me tonight.
Thank you, Jody. I'm honored to be with you.
Awesome. Well, I am honored for all the work you do for the kingdom of God and to help his people. It's just remarkable that he has raised so many of us up because it's time when he says he's going to heal his bride, he is going to heal his bride. And I just honor the work that you're doing out there. And so I'm honored to have you
Thank you.
here.
Thank you.
I'd like you to kind of start where you're comfortable, but bring the listener into that story when you talk about, yeah, we went to church all the time. And oh, yeah, that's right. And my dad sexually molested me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my father was a leader in the church, not a pastor, but he was a visible leader in the church, a teacher of Bible studies, in-depth Bible studies. I mean, his knowledge of scripture was thorough. He went to Bible college himself to become a pastor, but he never became one. So he knew a lot and was respected for that. Very brilliant man. And my mother actually was in the days in churches when it was organs and choirs and
Mm.
piano. My mother was the main church musician, so she was up front every week. Very talented woman, and she was well known. And so both of my parents were looked up to. Though later many would say we always knew your father had a issue with anger, but they were
Mm.
they hid well behind that mask of being church leaders. And what went on at home was very different, as happens to many of us. But my father sexually abused me from the time I was very small, all the way through my whole childhood. And my mother knew what was going on and did nothing. And in addition to that, my father, now we have a word for it, that he trafficked. I'll just speak about me. He trafficked me,
Mhm.
and we just knew that he was selling us. When he needed money or just whenever, he trafficked us, and we had to participate in child pornography, and it was just a lot of evil. Very, very evil.
Oh,
But
well, and
people
I
would
think
not
that,
have known.
see, and that I think though that you wisely use the word evil because there really isn't any other. There's just no other word that can create these kinds of things where you're
Mhm.
giving your own children for money for sexual pleasures to other people and the pornography. I had a man from Canada that's now a counselor, and same thing. He was part of a and I can think actually of Mary Knight, same thing. She was sex trafficked. My father didn't ask for money. He had friends there that would use us, but they didn't get paid for it. Maybe they did. I never saw it. But this is so it's not an uncommon story
Right.
in what I do. When you start unraveling this, and they say 1 in 3 people have gone through this, the truth is that only 80% of people ever tell. So if you think about the real numbers, it's really quite staggering. But you said that your mom knew. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was she with you in these rooms? How did you know that your mother knew?
Well, she knew there were times when she was there. There were times when she would just say, just do what your father says. So she knew. And there were other times when
Wow.
she or my father would quote from scripture and say, "Children, obey your parents in all things." So they would spiritualize it,
Wow.
you know. So she absolutely knew what was going on.
Well, and here when you say spiritualize it, no wonder the man was angry because you are using the words of God in a
Hmm.
lifestyle that comes from hell. Yeah, you're going to be angry because you cannot, those two things cannot correlate. They cannot be together, although Satan used the Bible against Jesus. So it's a very common tactic of darkness. But how did that feel? One of the things I think that people forget often is the horrific betrayal when a mother steps into the scene because now you have no one. I know what that feels like. I can remember the time when my mother actually came into the rooms where and participated in. I was devastated. I probably was only 3. We moved out of that house when I turned 4. But talk to me about that feeling. Do you remember, it almost becomes immortalized to us, doesn't it, when we know that both parents have forsaken us?
Yeah, you just feel utterly alone and helpless and powerless. And even just, but it's never, sexual abuse is never in just isolation. There's so much brokenness in the home apart from that, that I remember as a small child, I would have nightmares and I would go into my parents' room and go to my mother and say, I had a bad dream. And she'd just say, go back to bed. So there was,
Mm.
it wasn't just about this that she didn't care. She didn't care about my fears. She didn't anything. So that I felt utterly alone. And I remember I had an older sister. She's passed away now, but I had an older sister. And when I had a nosebleed in the middle of the night, it was her that got up and cared for me because we knew my mother would do nothing. So
Mm.
it's all together, isn't it? It's the brokenness
Yes,
of the family.
it is so wise to bring that up. And I just want to say I'm so sorry when I hear you talk about that. And it's okay that I just want to say that because I know it's such a loss in childhood when, firstly, you have these horrible wounds, physically, spiritually, everything, wounds, you know what I mean? And then you have absolutely no treatment, not even, there's no comfort, and the no comfort is, well, we have to learn how to become stoic because if we don't become stoic, we can't survive, right?
Well, I don't remember becoming stoic, but I remember
Mm.
uh, pushing it all in. And
Well, and
when
that's
I,
what I mean by stoic, right? You certainly aren't going to ask anybody. So what do you do with all that? You bring it all within.
right, I remember when I started the healing journey and began to face all the things of my past, and there was a change in me. There was a physical change in me because my ears used to ring all the time because it took me so much
Mm.
focus to keep the pain and the emotions and the thoughts of the memories away. So that's what I remember. I remember the ear ringing intensity of focus for me to live the double life that my parents designed for us.
Yeah, and talk about that double life. That double life doesn't end anytime soon.
No.
What Louise is talking about with these double lives are we have to present like the family's okay because
Mhm.
I think you said when the church doors were open, you were there. So
Right.
what did I mean? I don't think people realize the cost of you never ask for help. You never, because you cannot, you never ask for comfort. You never ask for anything really. And now though, you have to put on pretend. And
Right.
that's devastating, isn't it?
Right. And so you learn to live. And so you were juggling all the time. And I'm sure your listeners can relate to it because you have to, my father would tell me that he needed to punish me for some infraction that I had done. So I am trying to be perfect so that as if that would make me avoid the abuse, but that was my strategy to be perfect so it wouldn't
Mhm.
happen. And I had to be a good student at school. I had to obey my parents. I had to do my chores. I had to make friends. all these things. You're juggling all these things just to survive. And people who have been
Right.
through it understand that dynamic. But it's,
Mhm.
and we didn't, when I was young, they didn't have a word for it, that it was trauma. That word was used
Mhm.
for car accidents and things like that. But it was the trauma of our
Mhm.
experience deeply affects our bodies, our brains, our hearts, our souls. And we just lived it. We didn't have words for it, but we just
We
lived
did,
it.
right. Really. And, it wasn't until the Vietnam vets, actually, that was when the whole trauma thing came around because they weren't doing well when they returned. Because again, they got no comfort. I mean, it was a horrible thing that they returned to in this country. But we learned a lot of trauma. I've read a lot of books about the studies they did. And one of the things that they found, which I love, is what helped them that other people returning from war didn't have was they started groups, survivor groups, like what
Mm.
we're doing. We're coming together, we're
Yeah,
bringing people, we're making it normal, we're talking about it. That
right.
started helping vets more than anything. But you're right, there were no words for it. And you talked about the ringing in your ears. Now think about, this is also how lunacy happens, though. And I
Mm.
can remember being in Hawaii, and I got a ticket and I needed to work it off, and I could type. And so they put me at the state hospital to type. And there was this young woman in there who was 15, and she had been raped by her father severely for years, and she went catatonic.
Mm.
So, when I think about this is awful, but when you say you became perfect, we actually also perfectly survived because we could have lost our mind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We
And it
really could
happens.
have.
And it does happen.
Yes.
And so I'm thankful that I finished college, I finished high school, I did well. I was National Honor Society. So that tells you the intensity of
Wow.
my focus,
Yep.
because I can't imagine going to school without that ear ringing intensity of focus and just being able to go and learn and not doing two things at once.
Well, and it talks about the resilience of children, and the survival says to us, you better do everything right or you're going to be hurt worse. And unless you've lived that, you don't know what the worst is. Because
Right.
I mean, it could get worse because sometimes it did get worse, right?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
so the way that we carry on is really, to me, quite remarkable. It's kind of miraculous. I know I met Jesus when I was very, very young, 3. I didn't know his name yet, but he came to me. I was crying against a wall in my bedroom, and I knew this presence. I wasn't scared. I didn't see anything. I just felt him with me.
Mm.
It was very interesting. So all my life he was with me. But did you have any kind of, and my parents were not yet religious, but talk to me about, where did you feel like God was in the midst of this? I know that you have an experience when you're a teenager, but when you're younger and you're going to church, where's God in all of this for you? Not your parents, but for you.
Well, when I was very small, it was two separate things. I could be at church and not, somehow in the way my brain was, I could do the two separate things. And I had wonderful teachers when I was a preschooler, and they told me these stories, true stories about God, about Jesus. And I just like, oh, I want that. I want that for me. And I learned that Jesus loves me.
Mhm.
And I said, I want you to be mine. I want to follow you. And so I surrendered. I didn't surrender. I just said, I want you to be mine, God, Jesus.
Mhm.
And he was. And that's the miracle. He was. He came to me and
Mhm.
he walked with me. And then as time went on, my focus was less about God and more about my parents. Because not only were we living this double life, my father would use scripture to control my life and everything. And I had to have inspections before I went out the door to make sure my clothes were
Yes.
modest enough that I couldn't shave my legs because God didn't create you without shaved legs. I mean, couldn't have earrings, all these things that we couldn't have
Mhm.
because of some scripture that he twisted just to control
Mhm.
us, to control me.
Mhm.
And so at a point when I started to be junior high, I was just embarrassed that God was embarrassing because all these things that my parents said were true about God not the kind God that I fell in love with when I was 4 and 5. He was
Mm,
this God that was, controlling and uncaring and aloof and mean. Because, of course, you put on God what your parents are like, especially your father. And so
right.
I had no interest in him. And so I just played the game. But when I was a young teenager, I went to our church's camp and I heard again about the love of God, and I surrendered to him again. And so I had this duality going on of the true Louise, the real me, really did want to follow through with that relationship that began when I was a preschooler, but I didn't want how my dad and mom did it. And so I
Mm,
began this trajectory of learning, trying to learn about God, but I was so confused because
mhm,
I still put on God how my parents were, especially my father. And so I didn't
mhm.
believe that God loved me.
Right. Well, there's all of these conflicts. I mean, you state it really well. So, right, and I so relate to that as a child wanting to know that God is love, because obviously our homes didn't represent love. Love
Right.
did not live there because we knew that love could not do the things that we had to live through and endure. And I know our stories are different, but I understand much of what you're saying. But see these deep conflicts, Louise, right? So
Yeah.
you've got this conflict of two separate gods. I always say it like two separate gods. There was a God of my father and then the God that I wanted to know. And they were two completely separate things, like the spirit of religion and the spirit of God, two separate things, right? So you have all these conflicts. One of the things I thought was very interesting listening to your interview that you did was you talked about the conflict between being, you called it arrogant and angry. Can you talk about, so now
Absolutely.
you're being a teenager, right? And so, but here we've already talked about in just these few minutes together how conflicting your childhood has been. Everything's a conflict. This parent's supposed to protect you and love you. They seem to hate you and they hurt you. I mean, every conflict you can have. And so now all of a sudden you have another conflict you talk about. Go ahead with that. I thought it was
And
very interesting.
it's an internal conflict because not only was I with this father that I felt like I had to be perfect to avoid being raped, but where the theology that he taught and that was in the circles I was in at the time was that if you really loved God, you would sin as little as possible. And so I wanted to please God. I'd given my life to him. And so
Right.
I believed I needed to be perfect for God to make him happy with me. Because if he's not happy with me, then it's what do I have? And I just,
Mhm.
God obviously doesn't care about me because of what happened to me. So I have to earn God's approval. And so the pain I had often was manifested as anger. And anger was
Mhm.
helpful to me, I thought at the time, because it made me feel strong and powerful. And so I would overreact to the least little thing. And now I know it's a trauma response, the fight, flight, freeze, friend, all of it. But at the time, my rage was just feel powerful in some way to make it through. So you're
Mhm.
not always feeling like complete helpless victim. And so I was
Right.
angry all the time. And yet I'm reading my Bible and at church and learning that rage, not anger, because everybody's angry, God gets angry, but rage is a sin. And I couldn't
Mhm.
stop sinning. And that's on one hand. And yet, in those places where I was super compliant, trying to be perfect all the time, I was like, from the outside, I looked like a really good person because I didn't swear like it made a difference. But in my
Mhm.
mind at the time, I didn't
Right.
swear. I was obedient. I was a great student. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke, all these things that in my world at the time were measures of righteousness and goodness.
Mhm.
I didn't do all those things. And so I was raging on one hand and felt like raw sewage on one hand. And on the other hand, I was arrogant because I'm like, I feel terrible about myself, but look at what I do that other people don't do and what I don't do that other people do. So that
Mhm.
was a huge conflict going on in me that people who knew me, most people didn't know how I struggled with rage. They could see it boiling a little bit, but it wasn't until I was married and had a family where it was unleashed. But at the time,
Right.
it
Well,
was
I imagine, right, your father probably wouldn't allow very much anger from you.
no, no, that I needed to get that under control and be respectful and all of that.
Mhm. Right. And so you have no outlet now for this. The other thing is, as I listen to you, you also, it sounds like a little bit were mimicking the behavior of your father around you because he probably looked very much like that. Even if people from the outside could see his anger, did he have rage? Did
Oh,
he,
yeah,
that you saw?
completely, completely. And if you would have said that I was acting like my father at the time, I would have been mortified because I wanted to
Mhm.
be the opposite of him. But I
Right.
couldn't control what was going on in me. I couldn't control my anger. I couldn't control, I was judgmental and critical. Oh my goodness, it was ugly.
Mhm.
I couldn't control it. And I felt so, it only added to my shame that
Mhm.
here I was trying
Right.
to be this follower of Jesus who loved other people, but I was so self focused and full of rage and shame and fear. Oh my goodness, we didn't even talk about fear that I couldn't
Right. Well,
manage it. You know all
right.
about that.
Well, no, I do, and I want to talk about that too. Yeah, I think it's interesting because so much of what you were feeling, you needed to be working out all of these conflicts and all of this pain and all of this turmoil. And yet, I wonder, were your parents, did you hear them critical of other people?
Oh,
Because one of the
yes.
things you said was, yeah, see, and we learn it so much. I had a feeling because my parents were the same way, very critical. But you said I was focused on myself. But the truth is, when we're critical, we're focusing on somebody else. And one of the things that I really feel like God has talked to me about is Jody, look at yourself. Take your eyes off your abuser, quit looking at everybody else, because then you quit criticizing. And all of a sudden, like when we get there, God's not going to say, so tell me everything your parents did to you. God's going to
Yeah.
say, Jody, what'd you do with the talents I gave you? But that's really far down the road. But it really is the ultimate goal, right? And so honestly, you weren't looking at yourself because you weren't allowed to look at yourself. And so this critical judgmental spirit is always focused outward. It's always
Right.
focused to keep people away. It's almost protective in a way. But you
It's a
talked about
deflection of our own shame. I'm deflecting my
yes,
shame when I'm thinking about
yes,
you and what your flaws are. Then I don't have to look at
exactly.
me. And when I say I was thinking about myself and self focused, it was about survival. That
Right. I
you
mean,
just you hunker down and you try to get through. And so even though you're always looking around hyper vigilant trying to manage your life and manage everything around you, there is a self focus, and it's not a criticism of myself that I say that, but it's survival. Like when you're going through transition, for those people who have experienced labor and delivery, when you go through transition,
mhm,
you can't talk to anybody else, but you just have to get through that
right.
pain. And that's what it was like, that you just have to work so hard to get through.
Right. And listening to you, it makes me think the heart of God as he looked down on you trying to breathe underwater.
Yeah.
I'm hard pressed to think that in your heart he didn't understand the
Oh,
difference. I just know he did, because you
absolutely.
may call it anger. You were doing the only thing that you had left righteously under every good thing in God's creation to do, just to stay alive, just to keep breathing underwater. But just under the
Absolutely.
goodness of God, he did not look at you in judgment and think, wow, what a sinner.
No,
I know he
no.
didn't. But
He was full of grace to me. He was full
yeah,
of grace
well,
to me.
he wanted to pluck you out of there, except that every person on this planet has their own moral agency and their right to choose what they're going to choose until the time they stand before God. But talk about, you started to bring up fear, and I think that that's an important thing to embrace in this conversation, because fear is such a horrible thing when it hunts you day and night, when
Hmm.
your eyes close, when your eyes open, when you are
Hmm.
hunted by fear. Anger actually feels like a relief a
Hmm.
little bit. Can you talk about the fear that you lived with?
Yes, the word I used was terror. I lived in
Yeah,
terror every day. Is this the moment my father's going to enter my bedroom? Is this the moment that he's going to tell me to get in the car and we're going to go
right.
somewhere? Is this the moment, because it's, as I said earlier, it's never just about the sexual abuse. Is this the day where I'm going to, there were times I did stand up to him because I'm a brave soul. And I would stand up to him and say, what you're doing is not what God would have you to do. And I would get the back of his hand first, and then other things followed. So I feared for my life. And he
Right.
told us, I'll just speak for myself, he told me that if we ever told, he would kill me. And I'd seen
Mhm.
him do some very evil things, and I believed him.
Mhm.
I still believe him to
Mhm.
this day.
Right.
And so I lived in terror every day, and I would listen carefully in the kitchen at dinner time when he came home from work as to how he closed the car door. If he closed it quietly, I'd breathe a sigh of relief. We all would.
Mhm.
But if he slammed the car door, the fear set in because I knew what was going to happen that night in some form or another. So we
Right.
lived in fear all the time.
Right. Constantly. I think that it's unrepresented what that does to a human body, because the pain of all of the act, I mean, that's torturous as it is, but the fear and the anticipation of when it's going to happen again and what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen next, because it's just human nature to want to try to think, what can I do to outthink this, to, you're always still trying to, but they hunt you at night, they hunt you at day, there is no safety
Right.
anywhere. And it's terror. It is terrorizing. It is truly terrorizing. And when you leave their home, it'd be wonderful to say, wow, I took off that fear, that shame, and I left it in that house. But that doesn't happen. So now you get married. At what age do you get married then?
I was 25 when I was married, in a really rocky dating relationship with my husband. He has his own story, but we married, and I just always was in trauma response mode at all
Mm,
times, expecting him to treat me as my father treated me. And I
right.
said I was going to marry someone the opposite of my father, and I did. And so I married someone passive and neglectful instead of
Oh,
abusive and
right.
raging. And he is, we're married 43 years now, and he's grown and been on his own healing journey. And he is an amazing man. I'm just very grateful. He's forgiven me for so much. And he stayed with me. Not everybody does. And so I'm very grateful for him. But it was,
Right. I mean,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, it
I
just,
didn't mean to interrupt you.
that's okay. But it was just, I needed someone different than my father. And that wasn't true for many other people. We marry something that is familiar. But it was a hard journey. And he received the fury of my rage on a daily basis.
Yeah, and you talked about that. So now, so you're 25, you have a tumultuous dating, but now you guys begin to have children
Hmm.
relatively soon.
We had, I
And
was, yeah,
good.
within I was 28 and 32 when I had my children. I have two daughters.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. And here's one of the things that I found is so our all of our intimacy, all of our natural relational responses are gone. Now, as mothers, we love and adore our children, but we have never had, what's the word? We've never had the beautiful gift of being present all the way, because when
Hmm.
you're present all the way, we would have gone insane. And so we're now on lockdown kind of when we come into life, and now you become a mother. Talk to me about how that works for you, because it's hard, isn't it?
It is. And I just thought that I would naturally just be a better mother than my mother was. And I was very attentive, and I did a lot of things that my mother would never have done. But I had unregulated emotions, and that did so much damage to my children. And I didn't, I mean, I went to counseling and groups and 12-step groups. And I mean, read every book. I think I read 50 books that at the time, that was a lot on sexual abuse.
Yeah,
Did
it's huge.
everything I could to heal, but
Mhm.
it just took a lot longer to heal than I could have wished. And so they experienced my trauma responses for much of their childhood. Unfortunately, even though I grew and they saw me change, and they would both admit that I grew and changed and healed, and my anger dissipated, and I was much more gracious and those kinds of things, but it did deeply affect them. And that was honestly harder for me to process and heal from than my own childhood, because I wanted so much to not do to my children what was done to me. And of course, I didn't. I didn't abuse my kids in the same way my parents abused me, but I harmed my kids through emotional abuse because of the dysregulated emotions that I had at the time, because we didn't understand trauma 35
Right,
years ago when I began that
right,
journey, So I did the best I could, and I'm grateful for all the tools that I had that were available.
right. So, one of the things I just resonate with so much of your story. I remember when my daughter was a preteen, she came to me and she said, Mom, you need to read a book just for fun, not about how to love better. And it still breaks my heart because I wasn't afforded any kind of knowledge about how
Yeah.
to do what I was doing. I mean, I married a very abusive man. He horribly abused all three of us.
Mm.
And I just thought if I read one more book, you know what I mean? I needed the answer. I was looking for the needle in the
Yeah.
haystack. And, what's so sad to me is that so much of our life has been spent, the years that the locust ate, that kind of a
Hmm.
thing where so many people are like, oh, I want to talk about this wall color. I want to talk about that. My gosh, I was just worried about loving my children right, because I knew we were in abuse again. I knew I was vacant. You know what I mean? All those things I knew. I didn't know
Right.
how to show up. I'd never shown
Right.
up. If I showed up, I was so, you know what I mean? And like you
Yeah.
say, dysregulated. You want to talk about pain. I mean,
Yeah.
a broken heart of, all of these things. So what do you think really was the catalyst to kind of get you over the hump where you started finding peace and rest in all of this?
Well, I began my own journey of healing first by attending adult children of alcoholics groups, because it was the first thing that was available to me, even though my father
Mhm.
didn't drink a drop of alcohol, but he was a sex addict, clearly, and it was close. And so I
Right.
began going to that. And actually, the church that my husband and I started attending had an adult children of alcoholics group. And so I went to that.
Mm.
And the leader of it was an incredible woman. And she said, "You have more questions than I can answer. Would you be willing to meet with the man who is the lead pastor of this church?" And I never met him in my life, didn't know who he was. And I said, "Well, if he can help me, sure, fine." And so I started meeting with this man, and this man changed my life. The first person I ever
Mm.
trusted, ever.
Beautiful.
And he had his own story where he came from a abusive childhood. And so he understood me and was not afraid of how broken I was. And he also
Mhm.
knew who God really was and is. And so he could begin to sift through all of that for me and help me to see what was true about my family of origin and what was true about God and what God thought about me. And he
Mm,
was so
it's so
he
beautiful.
he he was there for me, in the middle of the
Yes.
night when I would have evil dreams. He told me to call
Mhm.
him. And it wasn't
Wow.
codependent because he
Yep,
was
I
just
get
being
it.
a good pastor,
Yes,
and
I
and
get it. And
and
I
so
agree.
all of the things that he did, it was life changing for me because there was a point where I was meeting with him for a long time, and he's just said to me, Louise, why do you think I meet with you? And
Mm.
I was really quiet and I just couldn't stop sobbing. And after about 30 minutes of sobbing, he just sat there and he didn't say anything. And I said, you meet with me because you love me.
Mm.
And in the book, I say that moment and I say, crack. There was a crack in the wall
Yeah.
that was around my heart. And for that moment, I let my pastor's love in. And that was the first time I ever let anyone love me. First time I began
Wow.
to open my heart, just a crack. That was it.
Hmm.
And then it closed back
Right.
up again. But he just loved me. And I was a mess, as you
And
know.
how old were you that when that moment happened?
I was probably 34.
Okay.
So I was
Okay.
young.
That's cool. Right.
And he just continued to walk with me. And he was the one who said, because I was adamant that I wanted to go confront my parents and expose them because they were at a church with 20,000 people or something. And he was a big leader there too. And my mother was up in front with me. And I wanted to confront them. And he said, if you really want to do it, I'll go with you. He said, but you need to forgive them
Oh.
first. He said, you need to
Hmm.
forgive them first, because if you don't forgive them and they respond badly, and then you'll respond, and then they'll make it be all about you instead of about them. And he was very, very wise. And so that was the next part of my journey, was getting to a place to forgive them, which I didn't really
And
want to
that's
do.
not easy. That is
No.
not easy because I want to hear all about that. And I also want to hear about the confrontation. But talk about forgiveness is different to all people. But talk to us a little bit about what it is to you.
Well, for me, in the beginning, forgiveness meant letting them off the hook. And I had
Mhm.
zero desire to do that. I wanted them to rot in hell. I fantasized about cutting my father's private parts off and nailing them to the wall. I had no desire to release them from the debt they owed me, because I felt they owed me for what they did. And so that was my journey with me and God. And my pastor encouraged me to make a list of all the things that they had done and the effects of it in my life. And I did, and that filled up a spiral notebook. And
Mhm.
I would kneel beside my bed and I'd say, okay, God, I want to forgive my father for what he did to me. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to. And then I'd try again. And
And
I,
I'm so thankful you did that because it's authentic. Keep going. It's
and
God can handle it.
yeah,
He doesn't want us
absolutely.
being phony.
Yes. And
Keep
so
going.
I was so dead set on confronting them that I said,
Mhm.
God, I'm not willing to forgive my parents, nor am I willing to be willing. And I'm not even willing to be willing to be willing.
Mhm.
And so I prayed that 3 times willing. I said, God, help me to be willing to be willing to be willing. And in that process, it went on for months. And I would just kneel by my bed and pray. And then I'd slam my notebook shut and throw across the room.
Mhm.
And time goes on. And I'm just teaching Sunday school at our church for 3-year-olds. And I'm walking the kids around, and it just dawns on me, hey, my parents are living scot-free back in their home in the Midwest,
Mhm.
and I'm the one that's miserable. And this picture came to my
Right.
mind of cable wire, that there was a cable wire with a hook on it. And every single thing in my spiral notebook had a cable wire with a hook, and all those hooks were in my heart. And the other end of the cable wire was at my parents' home. And I'm like, I'm the one that's carrying all this, and they're doing nothing. They feel just fine. And so I'm like, I want this gone. And so I said, okay, I think I want to forgive for my sake. Not so I can confront my parents, but so that I can forgive for my own sake. And so I kept trying to do it. And little by little, my heart got a little softer. And I remember the last time I tried, I was kneeling beside my bed, and I took the hook, figurative hook, out of my heart. And I said, okay, God, I want to forgive my father for what he did to me. And I couldn't let go. I'm like, ugh, I can't. And I said, okay, God,
Mhm.
I need you to help me. And I took the hook out, and I turned to where I imagined God to be in the room. And I said, God, I need to forgive my father for violating my trust, for doing all the things he did to me. And then I went, no, I want him to pay. And I said, someone has to pay. And then I went, Jesus paid. Jesus
Mhm.
paid. That Jesus died on the cross for not just my sin. Jesus died on the cross for my parents' sin. And in that moment, I went, he died for my sin too. I'm on level ground in front of the cross with my parents. I have no right to judge them. I have no right to withhold forgiveness from them. Thank you, God, that Jesus, you paid for what they did to me. And in that moment, I could go through the spiral notebook and forgive them all for what they did. It was a miracle. It was a miracle of God. And all of a sudden, Jesus' death on the cross meant a lot to me. It wasn't
Mhm.
just this nice thing that Jesus died on the cross. He died on the cross for me and for my parents. And he died so that I could be free, because he paid the debt that my parents couldn't pay and didn't want to pay. But there could be justice because of Jesus. And that was, you can imagine, a life-changing moment for me. That's where the
That's
freedom began.
that is probably one of the most honest, righteous stories I've heard of forgiveness, Louise, honestly. That it I don't need to say anything else. That is was such a beautiful, beautiful way between the relationship that God worked it out with you, because God is relational and he knows how to
Amen.
find us, doesn't he?
He does.
That's absolutely beautiful. So after this beautiful and the struggle of forgiveness, I think a lot of times it would come back to me and I do the same thing, then I'm going to forgive him again. I think about Corey Ten Boom saying when she met the man that killed her family, and she said, God, I can't. And she said, I felt my hand going up. It was like
Mhm.
Holy Spirit helped her lift her hand, because forgiveness, when it comes from the heart, not just lip service, is a very, very, very hard thing to do. And you do have to find, because the lack of justice, until you understand what God's justice looks like. And that's a whole nother category. But
Right.
I'd like to hear now. So you go back to your, it was a beautiful story. You go back to your pastor and you say to him, I've found forgiveness. Let's go confront. Is that how this goes?
Yes. And then my pastor actually contacted my parents and said we were coming. And we went twice because in the Bible, when it talks about reconciling with someone, you go one time. It's in Matthew 18, if anybody wants to
Hmm.
look it up in a Bible. But you go once, and if the person doesn't respond, you go back a second time with more witnesses, and you try again. And so that's what we did. We went once, and they absolutely denied everything, which didn't surprise me. And we went back a second time, and my sister, she herself didn't go. She was in the same town. She didn't go because she knew she remembered my father said he would kill us if we told. And she was afraid, but she sent her husband with her, what she wrote as her testimony. And so we went back both times, and my parents denied it both times, which I was not surprised at all. And we said, if you are willing to own what you did and get the help you need, then we can talk about what it might look to earn trust and build relationship. And at the end of that particular meeting, my mother said, Louise, can't we just agree to disagree about this? And you can still send me pictures of your daughters. And I said, no, Mom, we will only have a relationship in the context of the truth. And that was 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. Yeah.
Wow. And so you guys, and did you go to their church and confront them, or did you go to their home and confront them? Because they were leaders in a church.
The first time we went to a hotel conference room that was just a neutral place. The second time we did go to their church, but again, our pastor went with us and one of the elders of our church went with us. And so we felt protected, and we were
Right. I'm
well
sorry.
prepared. No, it's going to just we were well
Yeah,
prepared.
I was curious if anybody from their church
Oh
attended with
yes.
them, or was it just your parents? So they did have other leaders in the room.
Yeah, in the first time, the counseling pastor of their church went with them, and he met privately with me afterward and interviewed me and asked me questions that I could tell he didn't know very much about sexual abuse, and that concerned me that he was the counseling pastor of this very large church and he didn't know
Mhm.
much about sexual abuse, but it was what it was. And he said at the end of that interview, he said, I believe you, Louise, but if I do anything about this, I'll lose my job. So that didn't
Wow.
surprise me because that's the kind of church my parents would choose where people could hide.
Mhm.
It happens in businesses and schools, but it happens in churches too, unfortunately. And the second time,
Right.
when we went back, there's the senior pastor of their church was there, and this is a very, very sad story for me to tell. But after we went through all of it, and my parents continued denying, their counseling pastor said, "Somebody's lying. Either Louise and her sister are lying, or the parents are lying." And my father made some comment, no, the devil is after our family. You know, it was just one of those moments.
Mhm.
But then the
Oh, I
senior,
know all about those
yeah, then the
devil
senior,
comments.
yeah, the senior pastor just turned to me and pointed at me. And he said, no, I have another explanation. He said, she, meaning me, she has joined on this whole bandwagon. If you have a little emotional distress in your life, you say you were sexually abused.
Wow.
And my husband, I thought, because he was there too, he was going to lunge at this man. But I just shook my head and went, this is the church my parents would choose to go to.
Wow.
Because there are good
See,
churches
and
out there, and this one
right,
was
but
not.
the problem with that though, Luis, is there's children at churches. And I
Absolutely.
think God is I think God is waking up the people that are running these churches saying you better be protecting these children, because if you're hiding predators, I'm going to find you. And you know what? Anybody who's listening, if you're in a church where you know there are pedophiles around, you've got to go to leadership.
Yeah,
And if leadership doesn't listen, you've got to go to the state because we've got to start protecting these
absolutely.
children. They will not tell you. If the predators are their parents, they will not tell anybody. You've got to go and tell, right? Don't you agree with that? It just
Absolutely.
breaks my heart.
It is. And I am thankful for the exposure that has happened, that there
Yes.
are predators in churches, because there's predators
Mhm.
everywhere. And it
Yes.
because in my view of life, sin exists everywhere. And so to say it can't happen, even when um, all of it that was happening in the Catholic Church was being exposed, and people were kind of
Mhm.
haughty and saying, well, that wouldn't happen in my kind of church. No, it does.
Right.
It
Yes, it
does.
does.
And God
Right.
is heartbroken for it because of how
Oh,
it distorts,
totally heartbroken.
how it
I
distorts
mean, a
our view of
child,
Him.
yes, and children are being hurt as a result of leaders' lack of protection around children, and
Absolutely.
it's got to change. And I feel like God is doing a change because our stories, the power of our testimony, is changing things because we're telling the
Yeah. Yeah.
80% come out of hiding and tell. And I love that your example is very godly to me of stay away from the predators if they don't say 100%, if they don't are not accountable 100%, do not stand by them. Do not take your children to Christmas dinner because they will molest
Yeah.
them under a couch. I mean, you can't. Predators don't quit unless they say 100%, this is what I've done. And even then you'd have to keep such boundaries around these
Right.
people because they're such unsafe people, right? So
Right.
your
And
children then grew up without grandparents on your side.
yes, they did, and intentionally. And I had
Yes, yes.
well-meaning people in the church and outside of the church say, well, they're still your parents.
Mhm.
You should still have relationship, at least talk to them. And I have two small children that I have to protect. I can't
Mhm.
be in relationship for that very reason.
Exactly.
It's just not
And
possible.
I honor you saying that because I tell you, I have struggled to do the whole I worry about my mom. She's a very dark, evil person. I try to reach out, and every time I do, it breaks my peace. And the last time I did, I really heard the Lord say, "Stop. What are you doing? Don't.
Yeah,
What are you doing?" It's his job to take care of
right.
evil people. It's not our job. And
Hmm.
listen to me say that again. It is not your job to
It's
take care
bigger
of
than
evil
us.
people. It's
It's
bigger than us. It's God's
yeah.
job. Let God do his job. He's very good at it. Pray for him from a distance,
Hmm.
but keep yourself and your family free. You have been such a pleasure to talk to. I love your story. It is such an honest, real story of how God heals. Talk to me today about where you are. We're just about at time. I cannot believe I was enthralled with your story too, and the time just flew by. So, what would you like to leave with the listener? I want to give you time to share from your heart here.
There were many, many years where I was furious with God. And I believe He abandoned me. He didn't love me. He liked other people more than me. He didn't care about me. I was worthless to Him. I truly believed that. And slowly, slowly, God began to heal my heart from the pain of what happened to me. And I could distinguish between Him and my parents. And it didn't happen overnight, trust me. But He loves you. He loves you with an everlasting love. He sent Jesus to die for your sin and the sin of what was done against you, just like in my forgiveness story. There is nothing too hard for God. Nothing is impossible with God. If you would have told me 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, that I would believe today without a shadow of a doubt that the God of the universe loves me fully and completely. I'm the apple of His eye. If you would have told me I believe it with all of my heart, I would have told you it would never happen. It would never happen. But here I am today, and I wrote this book and all the things that I do because my life has turned from feeling like I'm raw sewage to believing that I am the apple of God's eye, the one who
Mm.
created me, that he loves me. And what happened to me was not my fault. It was the choice of my parents and all the other men who participated in the evil things. It was their choice. And God was brokenhearted for what happened. And he didn't sit idly by. That's what I believed. He sat idly by and let it happen. No, he sent Jesus to die on the cross for those things so that I could heal, so that I could be free. And that is what God has for you because he loves you. Do not believe in your shame that God doesn't care, because he does. If people in the church have failed you, if your family has failed you, if your husband has failed you, whoever, they are not God, because he loves you with an everlasting, steadfast love. And he did everything so that you could be healed and free and know him and experience a love that is far beyond and above anyone else's love. And my life is a testimony to it. And I pray that you would know and come to know the love of God, the one who created you and knows you best, that you would know in the same way I do that he loves you.
Man, I am just going to leave that right there because there is nothing to add to that. That is so beautiful. And I will put Louise, how you can find her, how you can find her book. I'll put it in the notes when I get this online. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight
My
and
honor and
sharing the
privilege.
power. You know what? Your story you are a living testimony to
Amen.
God's love and what he does. And you can feel it. I can feel it being here. Thank you. I honor you. I respect you. Thank you for the work that you do for the kingdom. I'm going to say that again because it so matters. For
Mm.
the viewer, thank you for listening tonight. This was just such a beautiful story. And until next time, remember, you see you. Take your eyes off the abuser. God is always looking to love you. Good night.